Hi, welcome to Living Recovery. My name is Travis Whitaker. Thank you to our sponsors, Living Recovery Interventions and Maple Mountain Recovery. I wanted to create a show that talked about recovery and addiction. In my own addiction for 12 years, I did a lot of damage to relationships and not only hurt myself, but I hurt my family. And now I've been in recovery for a little over 11 years. And I want to bring people in and talk about their story so you can get an idea of what addiction looks like and what recovery looks like. So today, I want to welcome John Red. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So let's talk about your story. Where did addiction start and what does it look like?
So I kind of have two stories as far as the way addiction went. It's almost like my friends will tease with me that I have two lifetimes in this world.
Yeah.
The first one started, I remember the first time I had a drink at the age of 14. I remember always feeling awkward and that I didn't fit in, and I had a friend bring over Smirnoff mini bottles.
Oh boy.
I learned how to pronounce Smirnoff that night.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what happened. I drank those. I went out into the neighborhood. Suddenly I was making eye contact with the girls. I thought I was funny. And I figured that was how I was going to be a part of this world.
It's kind of like a social lubricant that allowed you to go out and feel okay.
Feel okay.
Yeah.
Feel okay. And all of the concerns I had before, they were gone.
Yeah.
And so I had kind of this paradigm going on inside of me, like this shift in that I was raised in a really LDS family. And I thought, okay, the one thing that's going to let me function in this world may be the one thing taking me to hell. But quickly, I just started drinking as often as I could. So the drinking and drug use escalated all through high school.
Is that locally? Were you here in Utah?
Yeah,
when that
I was
happened?
raised in Farmington.
Okay.
And so all of that happened in Farmington. And then from there, it just escalated to a point where it was beyond out of control.
Yeah.
And so at the age of 19, I called my parents and I just said, look, I need help. I was shooting up heroin and cocaine on a daily basis. And my life had just gotten to a point where I didn't think it was worth going on anymore.
Yeah.
And so my mom came down and said, look, we'll help you. And so I went to
And how old were you when
19.
she came? 19.
19.
Okay.
So I checked into a rehab at that point, went into treatment, and there was something about being in treatment. I liked the authenticity that people had. I kind of always felt like I was maybe a black sheep, and I felt like I'd found kind of a whole tribe of black sheep, like people that understood me, that I got along with. And so I thought, this is going to be what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. So I went to the U of U and got a degree in psychology, went to the Graduate School of Social Work, earned all the credentialing to become an LSAC, got married, started having a family, and decided to go with a different career path.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
And I don't know an addiction that's under control.
no,
Because how you were saying, it was you were out of control. I don't know of an
Yeah.
addiction. It's you control that,
well,
and and then when I went into treatment, I thought I was the only person that was like me because you're talking
Yeah,
about you go into treatment
absolutely.
and now you're getting along with people. You felt welcomed, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was always out of control, but I didn't have the same types of consequences I started having at the end. And so I could kind of control the consequences at first. And so what happened is I went and I got all this knowledge and I figured this will be what I'm doing. And I got married and decided that I wanted to go work in medical sales. So I went and got an MBA, got married, started a family. And what happened in my life, so I'm telling you about at the age of 14, I remember that night exactly what happened. And then I had a son who was getting ready to turn 3. My wife was 7 months pregnant with twins. I had just gotten a job in medical sales, graduated from the MBA program.
So how old are you when that happened? Because
This is
14
28.
Okay, so 14 to 19, you're hitting it hard. You're using heroin, cocaine. You get help at the age of 19. How old were you when you got married?
I was married at the age of 25.
Okay, 25, and you had gone through and had all that schooling, and things were going well.
Things were
right?
going well.
Okay.
And then at the age of 28, we were moving down to Las Vegas for the job. I had gone to check in with the doctor, and what had happened, I got a phone call. It was actually St. Patrick's Day of 2003. I remember it vividly.
Yeah.
It was 5:45 at night. I was out in front of the house getting it ready to sell it. And the doctor called me and said, hey, we got your test results back and they're suspicious. And I had no idea what suspicious meant. So I said, okay, that's cool. What does suspicious mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, it means that you've got cancer and we're worried it's a pretty advanced stage and would like you to come in first thing tomorrow morning. I've cleared my schedule.
So what made you go get a test done? Were you not feeling well? What?
Well,
what?
I just tiled the kitchen. I'd gotten a new job. We were moving, and I thought I'd see the family doctor and just kind of
Oh, okay.
just do some blood work and head off and moved down to Vegas. And what happened is he ran some tests and found cancer.
Wow.
And so I went in the next morning, and I can remember going in there with just a sense of panic.
Right.
And I asked him what we were looking at, and he said, "You've got stage 4 thyroid cancer." He says, "We need to operate immediately. It looks like it's through your lymph nodes." And I asked him what the prognosis was, and he told me, he said, "Well, worst case scenario, you've got 6 months." And at that point, I didn't hear a single thing else he said.
And you have a 3-year-old, and you're
Turning 3.
turning 3.
1
and,
month from 3
Wow. And your wife was pregnant.
with twins.
Wow. Okay.
And so suddenly I just went to this place of just such immense fear,
Yeah.
such immense panic. I went in for the first surgery, and I was supposed to be in the OR 2-3 hours. I was in there all day. I was supposed to be in the hospital a couple of days. I was in there 11 days, and they'd accidentally severed a branch of my spinal accessory nerve. And so I couldn't use my left arm for a couple years. I was in immense pain, and they gave me a bottle of OxyContin and told me good luck. And so I remember it wasn't even 24 hours. Like, I've thought back on this often, and I cannot even remember how much pain I was in.
So what year is this that they give you the bottle of OxyContin?
Oh, 3.
2003.
2003. And so
Yeah.
I couldn't remember how much pain I was in, but I remember taking the pills because it calmed me.
Yeah. That's exactly. I've told my story, and OxyContin in I think it was 1996 or 97 when it first came out,
Yeah.
was my, I think, huge downfall as well.
Yeah.
OxyContin, but it was created for people that had cancer. That's what
Absolutely.
the medication was actually created for, because it had a long-term effect. There was that time release.
Absolutely.
What did that feel like?
You know, the problem with it is it was a familiarity that became uncomfortable.
Right.
And I could tell where it was going. And I thought to myself, you know what, John, you've got a degree in this. You have all this book knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You can pull yourself out of it. And what happened in my life is I started taking the OxyContin daily. I got to a point where I was drinking a fifth of vodka a night to be able to fall asleep.
And you went from 14 to 19, and then you got sober and went from 19 to 28.
19 to 28. Correct.
But just life was great.
Life was
grand.
great.
You kind of wanted to leave all that addiction in the past.
Yeah.
You get cancer, you have surgery, and they give you OxyContin.
Yeah.
Now you're drinking.
Now I'm drinking. Wow. And so what happens is I go to several surgeries. So first surgery's up in Layton, then Huntsman Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And after that surgery, I got a clean bill of health of cancer. And I remember just sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with my life now?
Yeah.
I am hooked on pills. I'm drinking every night. I'm so detached and not connected to anybody. And I thought, well, you know what? You're a guy who's had a lot of self-will. Will yourself out of this disease, John. You can do it.
So from 28 until when are you feeling like that? How old were you when you're drinking and you're taking all the OxyContin?
So 28, I got a clean bill of health from cancer at 31.
Okay.
31, 32. And I was holding things together pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I was high functioning. And I think most of us are high functioning until we're not. And the problem is all the jobs that I had, I started losing.
Yeah.
And it just got to a point where I couldn't hold it together at all.
How was your wife doing during all this?
We started having some serious problems.
Yeah.
So she was, my wife's a saint. She was holding a family together. We ended up throwing another kid into the mix because kids always fix things, right? So we thought, okay, this will fix it. I was living in Vegas and moved back from Vegas thinking, well, if I move from Vegas, that'll fix it. And the problem was I brought me with me. Yeah. And I was a disaster.
Yeah.
And so once we moved back up to Utah, it just started escalating. And that was in 2010. And so I was holding some jobs together, and then it got to a point where I just couldn't hold anything together.
Yeah.
And so what happened for me, I can take you to a pivotal moment of what changed things in my world is in 2017, in the summer of 2017, we're going on a family vacation to Newport Beach, California. And
I love Newport.
I love Newport too. I was so excited. And so we're going with the in-laws and we're getting ready to go. And it was 2 days before the vacation and I got uninvited. And so I was just a wreck. I couldn't hold anything together. So
and that's because of drug use?
Because of my drug use. Yeah. It was intolerable to have me around. I was one of those guys who had so much self-pity, like it actually suffocated the people around me.
Right.
All I wanted to talk about was me and how poor my life was and how picked on I was. And it just took all the air out of the room every time I walked into it.
Well, I think, and from my own experience, my addiction made me talk about the things I never talked about.
Yeah.
When I was sober.
Yeah.
So the things that bothered me, my wife would find out more about me and then I wouldn't remember that I talked about it.
Yeah.
So underlying trauma, underlying issues that I just always said was okay. I'm fine. It's
Absolutely.
okay. I'll get over it. But I never talked about it. So if you're in that self-pity, you're probably talking about things that are uncomfortable to you that you can't normally talk about.
Yeah. And it was everyone else's fault.
Yeah.
So like if you had my marriage, you would drink too. If you had lost my jobs, if you had my health, like it was everyone else's fault.
Yeah.
And so I'd gotten to a point where I finally got uninvited on the family vacation. They called me a couple days into it and told me it was the best vacation they ever had.
They needed a break too.
They more than needed a break. And so what had happened is I had gotten to just a point of desperation. I had no idea what to do. And I developed a level of spirituality the first time I went through treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I thought maybe this is what's going to help me. And so, like as a last ditch resort, I remember going around the house and I remember locking all the doors and I pulled all the blinds. I don't know why I did this because I wasn't somebody people came to visit. I went down in the basement and I went into a bedroom and I locked a door and I went inside. And the only thing I could come up with was to maybe say a prayer. Mm. And so I just sat on the bed and I said, God, if there's a way out of this, please help me. And from that moment on, my life started to change. And so a lot of things happened and I ended up being able to get help. And I'd love to talk to you about kind of how things changed and what happened in that process.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and take a break and we'll be right back to hear the rest of John's story. Thank you.
I am a business owner.
I am a mother, a doctor.
I am a student athlete.
A lawyer.
I'm a police officer.
I'm your neighbor.
I needed meth.
Opioids.
I needed coke.
I needed alcohol.
I needed opioids.
I needed heroin.
I needed help.
Maple Mountain Recovery is here to help you with your healing and recovery. Call 801-499-9316 or visit us online at maplemountainrecovery.com. Welcome back to Living Recovery. Again, thank you to the sponsors, Maple Mountain Recovery and Living Recovery Interventions. Also, thank you to my guest, John Red.
Yeah.
John, so you went into a room and you prayed to God.
Yeah.
So tell me what that looked like there.
Yeah, I was out of options.
Yeah.
And so being out of options, it was the only thing I could think of, and it was one of the last options I wanted to try. I was pretty convinced that I wouldn't get the help. I was pretty convinced that it wouldn't work for me, but I was left with nothing. And so I went in there and asked for help, and it was kind of answered the way I perceive it now is answered in a weird way, but it was answered exactly how it had to be.
Yeah.
So within 3 days, the job that I was working at, that I was barely holding on to, I got asked not to come into work anymore. Mm-hmm. My wife came back from the vacation and she looked at me with this resolve that I'd not seen in her face before. And she said, look, you have to go. She goes, I don't care if we stay married or get divorced, you have to leave. I couldn't get my kids to look me in the eyes. Like my twins that I talked about were 14 at the time. My oldest was 17. I went to my parents' house and they have several addicts that they've raised. And so they're pretty good enablers. And they were just done.
Yeah.
And they looked at me and said, we can't help you. And then it was within a day of that I had an opportunity to go to treatment.
And that's one of the hardest things as a parent that has to be done is say, I'm done. I cannot financially be responsible to help you die. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
That's exactly what it comes down to. And those boundaries, the boundaries that they set were the reason why I got changed. I believe that if I had held on to a job, I wouldn't have gotten help. I would have said, I'm trying to work. If I had a place to live, if my wife was going to let me stay at home, I would have said, okay, I've got stuff to do to hold it together. If my parents would have helped to bail me out at that time, I don't believe I would have gotten help. But I was left with no other options. I was left with what had become of my life. And it was awful.
And what you couldn't see at the time is what you prayed for was happening, right?
Yeah. So I have this theory on it right now that I think that I work a 12-step program. I believe in a higher power. And I believe that sometimes when we think our world's falling apart, it's God's way of bringing it together.
Yeah.
And I needed mine to fall apart structurally, not from the outside, but I needed every facet of it just to crumble for it to be able to be brought back together.
And your story and my story is a lot alike. My wife was tired. She's like, you got to leave. She would get to the place when I would leave when I was high, that she was waiting for a knock at the door at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. that I was dead. So she was getting ulcers. She was having some mental health issues. She was keeping it all together for the outside look that everything was okay during the time, taking care of our three children, working, paying the bills, while I was just bringing all this destruction and chaos into the life. And if she hadn't had the boundaries that she did, where you got to go, and the cops came and said you got to go, kind of like what you went through, I probably wouldn't have changed. No. I would have died. I mean, I would have died of a drug overdose.
I'm convinced of that myself. I'm convinced that prayer was answered the exact way it had to be answered for me to get help. And thank heavens for that. And so I went in and I was willing to get help. I was willing to do whatever was asked. One of the counselors at the place I went to said something to me when I explained all my education, and she looked at me and she said, you know what, you're going to have to forget all that crap you think you know, because you've proven you don't know anything.
Yeah.
And I heard that, and it just deflated me. And I thought to myself, you know what, she's right.
We've got to let the ego and pride just
Yeah.
move it aside.
She smashed the ego. And I, as you were speaking, there's one thing that really came to mind. So I like Alcoholics Anonymous. I participate in a lot of what they do. I like the book, the big book.
Yeah.
And there's 2 sentences in the book that say, with this disease goes an annihilation of all things worthwhile in life, and it engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers.
Yeah.
And so I remember the morning I was going to treatment, and I remember these twins who I was never supposed to see grow up. Or at least I didn't think that was even possible for me. They were 14 years old, and I remember looking at them and saying, you know what, Dad's going to go away for a couple months. Can I get a hug? And the boy twin came up to me, Charlie, just patted me on the arm and said, you know what, good luck, Dad, and turned and walked off. And my daughter, who was literally across the room, looked at me and waved and said, you know what, Dad, I'm late for the bus. And somehow it was that moment that it clicked to me that what I had done had such a profound effect on the people in my life.
Yeah.
See, I didn't think I was hurting them because I wasn't using in front of them.
Right.
I wasn't involving them in it. I was going off on my own and isolating, and I thought, you know what, I'm not hurting them. And I didn't realize that not being around and not being present hurt them quite a bit.
Absolutely. And I thought in my addiction that I was so secretive that nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
That's kind of how we feel.
I was convinced.
But when I'm having seizures at the house and the ambulances are coming all the time, or the police are coming because I'm just, messed up, or from all the multiple car wrecks, you don't realize that they're sucking all this in. That's just something that's where we bring the trauma into their lives.
Absolutely.
So I'm a real big believer that, we talk about one person may use, but the whole family suffers. So my family is in recovery with me. And I truly believe that it's a family disease, and we celebrate our recovery date together.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important and I tell people this all the time, because we both work in the industry, and I'm sure you say the same thing. When someone calls and wants to get a loved one help, I tell them, are you going to get help?
Yeah.
Because you can't just let what you think is and perceive as the problem go into treatment. they're going to come back at some
Yeah.
point. So when you come back, you need to both be healing and on that journey of healing for us to stay together married. You know,
Right.
I just celebrated 26 years of marriage last week.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And you know what? My entire addiction and my entire recovery, which 12 years of addiction, a little over 11 years in recovery, has been our almost entire relationship.
Yeah.
You know, so and probably a lot of yours.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm a better man today. I know that I'm a better man because, as you talked about, I suit up, I show up, and I make plans with my kids. I do not break it.
Absolutely.
You know?
And they can count on me.
Yeah.
And I've got a different relationship. Thank heavens I've got a different relationship with my family today. My wife and I, going into this, I was in treatment on my 20-year wedding anniversary in residential. We had about 11 years of marriage counseling up until then.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the last 3 years, we're coming up on 23 years.
That's
and,
awesome.
Yeah, and the last 3 years have been the best years of our marriage.
That's awesome.
And it's beautiful because she got into the process of healing as well. And you can't take someone out of a system that might be broken and put them back into a broken system.
Yeah.
And so if everybody can heal, it changes things. I think the analogy I use, it's like boats on a lake. And if one boat's struggling, if you jump on that boat, all you're going to do is sink it.
Right.
But if everybody makes sure their boat's like ship shape, it's like the water table rises and everybody gets out of trouble. And I found that to be true in my life. And so my world looks 100% different than it used to 3 years ago. Thank heavens for that.
Right. I mean, I sit here and I get the privilege to talk to individuals that get their lives on track, and it makes me so happy to see that you and your family are in this together.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? And that's something that's the message we want to share.
Yep.
You know, it's that, you know, life isn't always the best, and we do some awful things on this journey, but it doesn't have to be the end result.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't have to be the end result, but you both have to do the work as a married couple, and then the children have to see that and want to be part of that, so
Yeah.
they can heal, so they don't pass that on.
It's the living amends we do, and it just makes me think about the best. If I can tell you about the best night I've had, like probably the best night of my life, it was the night my twins turned 15, and they wanted to go to Classic Skate. And I don't know if like you've ever been to Classic Skate. I'm going to tell you it's quite literally like my version of hell. I actually think hell sounds funner than Classic Skate.
I've been there in the 80s.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was getting ready to go, and all I could afford at the time was 3 boxes of Little Caesars pizza.
Yeah.
I was convinced it was just going to be awful, and I remember walking in there thinking, you know what, John, just make this about them. So I'm tall like you are. I'm 6'3". I put on roller skates. I go to Classic Skate. I'm not overly coordinated, so it's like a giraffe going around the rink a couple of times. And I just smiled and laughed and had the best time. Well, that night, these twins woke me up separately and told me that was the best birthday they ever had. I had always focused so much on what I was giving them.
Yeah.
And I wasn't always there. When they turned 15, it was the first time I was ever sober on their birthday. And I got a chance to be there, and I got a chance to be a part of it. And that was probably the best night I've ever had in my life.
And it
It's
had
a night
nothing
I
to
will
do.
never forget.
Had nothing to do with money.
No, nothing to do with anything
You were
on the outside.
there, and they
Yeah.
had their dad. That's what it
Yeah.
was about.
I was a part of it. And so my life today is so different than it was, to a point where I didn't know it was possible. I didn't know that I could love waking up. I didn't know that I could love just being a part of this world. And I have the opportunity now to be a sober husband, a sober father, a sober employee. I get chances. I talk at my twins' high school. So I go to their health classes twice a year and talk to them about addiction and alcoholism.
Yeah.
And they actually come to class, and they're proud of their dad for doing it. And so it's like I look at it like I suffered in silence for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And today I've got an opportunity to recover out loud. And so I just recover out loud.
And you love the image that you see in the mirror. That was my biggest issue too when I was stuck in addiction, because I try to explain to people that have never suffered with addiction, we don't like who we are during our addiction. I did not like myself.
No.
I just didn't know how to stop.
No.
I didn't know how to quit to get my life on track. I was so stuck that and it becomes where it's like Groundhog's Day. It's the same thing every day. And you eventually get to the point where you have to have the drugs or alcohol to not get sick and to even function at all. And I had never even heard of recovery or detox or treatment back in 2009. You talked about, you thought you were special, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was anybody else like me that understood what I was going through until I went to treatment.
Yeah.
And today we get to sit here and we get to talk about recovery. We get to talk about family. We get to talk about all these gifts of sobriety. And, I tell people now I get the opportunity to wake up every morning and I get to choose how people treat me. I get to choose how I treat others.
Yeah.
Right. And I get to choose how I take on the day. And that's what's so important. And I just try to make that a positive every morning when I get out of bed, because I was so caught up in just feeling awful about myself and hating life.
Yeah.
Now we get to pay it forward. So I want to thank John Red very much for joining today. Again, Living Recovery Interventions, for one of our sponsors, Maple Mountain Recovery. If you're struggling out there, there's always hope. There is a better way. You can just reach out for help. Maple Mountain Recovery's phone number is 801-499-9316, or you can visit us online at maplemountainrecovery.com.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.